Once again, Lightsong felt an odd satisfaction. Instincts he hadn't known he had drove him to seek out the place where the servant had died. The wood had been replaced. His heightened eyes could easily tell the difference between the new wood and the old. He walked a little further. The patch where the wood had turned gray was gone as well, seamlessly replaced with new material.
Interesting. But not unexpected. I wonder, are there any more patches?
Lightsong walked a little further and was rewarded by another patch of new wood. It formed an exact square.
Your Grace?
Lightsong looked up to see the curt young priest he had spoken with the day before.
Ah, good. I was hoping that you would come.
This is most irregular, Your Grace.
I hear that eating a lot of figs can cure you of that. Now, I need to speak with the guards who saw the intruder the other night.
But why, Your Grace?
Because I'm eccentric. Send for them. I need to speak to all the servants or guards who saw the man who committed the murder.
Your Grace, the city authorities have already dealt with this. They have determined that the intruder was a thief after Mercy Star's art, and they have committed to...
Scoot! Can this man ignore my demand?
Only at great peril to his soul, Your Grace.
The priest eyed them both angrily, then turned and sent a servant to do as Lightsong asked. Lightsong knelt down, looking at the square of new wood. It was larger than the other two that had been ripped up, and the colors matched far better. It was just a square patch of wood that was just a slightly different color than its neighbors. Without breath, and a lot of it, he wouldn't even have noticed the distinction.
Trapdoor. This patch isn't as new as the other ones back there. It's only new in relation to the other boards.
Lightsong crawled along the floor, deliberately ignoring the door in the floor. Once again, unexpected instincts warned him not to reveal what he'd discovered. Why was he so wary all of a sudden? Was it the influence of his violent dreams and imagery from the painting earlier? Or was it something more? He felt as if he were dredging deep within himself, pulling forth an awareness he had never before needed. Either way, he moved on from the patch, pretending that he hadn't noticed the trapdoor, and was instead searching for threads that might have been caught on the wood. He picked up one that had obviously come from a servant's robe and held it up. The priest seemed to relax slightly.
So, he knows about the trapdoor. And perhaps the intruder did as well.
Lightsong crawled some more, discomforting the servants until the men he had requested were assembled. The hallway was growing quite crowded, so he shooed them back out into the sunlight. Outside, he regarded the group of 6 men.
Identify yourselves. You on the left, who are you?
My name is Gagaril.
I'm sorry.
I was named after my father, Your Grace.
After he what? Spent an unusual amount of time at the local tavern? Anyway, how are you involved in this mess?
I was one of the guards at the door when the intruder broke in.
Were you alone?
No, I was with him.
Good. You two go over there somewhere.
Lightsong waved his hand at the lawn. The men looked at each other, then walked away as indicated.
Far enough that you can't hear us.
The men nodded and continued.
All right. Who are you for?
We were attacked by the man in the hallway.
The man pointed at 2 of the others.
All 3 of us, and one other. The man who was killed.
Terribly unfortunate, that.
Lightsong pointed at another section of the lawn.
Off you go. Walk until you can't hear me anymore. Then wait. And now you.
Lightsong was regarding the last man, a shorter priest.
I saw the intruder flee, Your Grace. I was watching out a window.
Very timely of you.
Lightsong pointed at a 3rd spot on the lawn, far enough from the others to be sequestered. The man walked away. Lightsong turned back to the priest, who was obviously in charge.
You said that the intruder released a lifeless animal.
A squirrel, Your Grace. We captured it.
Go and fetch it for me.
Oh, Your Grace, it's quite wild, and...
The men stopped, recognizing the look in Lightsong's eyes, then waved for a servant.
No, not a servant. You go and get it personally.
The priest looked incredulous.
Yes, I know. It's an offense to your dignity. Perhaps you should think about converting to Ostrism. For now, get going.
The priest left. Lightsong walked toward the first group he had sent off onto the lawn, the 2 guards.
Now, tell me what you saw.
He came to us, pretending to be a madman, Your Grace. He sauntered out of the shadows, mumbling to himself. It was just an act, though. And when he got close enough, he knocked us both out.
How?
He grabbed me around the neck with tassels from his awakened coat, knocked him in the stomach with the hilt of a sword.
The second guard raised his shirt to show a large bruise on his stomach, then cocked his head to the side, showing another one on his neck.
Choked us both. Me with those tassels, Fran with a boot on his neck. That's the last thing we knew. By the time we awoke, he was gone.
He choked you, but didn't kill you. Just enough to knock you out.
That's right, Your Grace.
Please describe this man.
Oh, he was big. Had a scraggly beard. Not too long, but not trimmed either.
He wasn't smelly or dirty. He just didn't seem to take much care of how he looked. His hair was long, came down to his neck, and hadn't seen a brush in a long while.
He wore ragged clothing, patched in places, nothing bright, but not really dark either. Just kind of bland, rather un-Halandran, now that I think on it.
And he was armed.
With a sword that hit me. Big thing. Not a dueling blade, more like an Easterner sword. Straight and really long. Had it hidden under his cloak, and we would have seen it if he hadn't covered it up by walking so oddly.
Thank you. Stay here.
With that, Lightsong turned and walked toward the second group.
This is very interesting, Your Grace, but I really don't see the point.
I'm just curious.
Excuse me, Your Grace, but you're not really the curious type.
You were the ones who saw the intruder in the hallway, right?
The men nodded.
Tell me what happened.
We were walking through the servants' hallway. We'd been released for the evening, and we're going to go out into the city to a nearby tavern.
And then we saw someone in the hallway. He didn't belong there.
Describe him.
A big man, had ragged clothing and a beard, kind of dirty looking.
Well, no, the clothing was old, but the man wasn't dirty, just slovenly.
Continue.
Well, there isn't much to say. He attacked us, threw an awakened rope at poor Taff, who got tied up immediately. Rauriv and I ran for help. Beblin stayed behind.
You stayed back. Why?
To help Taff, of course.
Lying. Looks too nervous. Really?
Well, mostly. I mean, there was the sword, too.
Oh, right. He threw a sword at us. It was the strangest thing.
He didn't draw it. He threw it?
He threw it at us, sheath and all. Beblin picked it up.
I thought I'd fight him.
Interesting. So you two left?
Yeah. When we came back with the others, after getting around that blasted squirrel, we found Dadlet on the ground, unconscious. And poor Taff, well, he was still tied up, though the rope wasn't wakened anymore. And he'd been stabbed straight through.
You saw him die?
No.
Beblin had, Lightsong noticed, a bandage on one hand.
The intruder knocked me out with a fist to the head.
But you had the sword.
It was too big to use.
So he threw the sword at you, then ran up and punched you?
The man nodded.
And your hand?
It got twisted. Nothing important.
And you need a bandage for a twisted wrist. Show me.
The man hesitated.
Show me or lose your soul, my son.
The man slowly extended his hand. Laramar stepped forward and removed the bandage. The hand was completely gray, drained of color.
Impossible. Awakening doesn't do that to living flesh. It can't draw color from someone alive, only objects. Floorboards, clothing, furniture.
The man withdrew his hand.
What is that?
I don't know. I woke up and it was like that.
Is that so? And I'm to believe that you had nothing else to do with this? That you weren't working with the intruder?
The man fell to his knees suddenly.
Please, my lord, don't take my soul. I'm not the best of men. I go to the brothels. I cheat when we gamble, but I didn't know anything about this intruder. Please, you have to believe me. I just wanted that sword. Oh, that beautiful black sword. I wanted to draw it, swing it, attack the man with it. I reached for it, and when I was distracted, he attacked me. But I didn't see him kill Taff. I promise. I hadn't ever seen this intruder before. You have to believe me.
I do. Let this be a warning. Be good. Stop cheating.
Yes, my lord.
Lightsong nodded to the men, then he and Laramar left them behind.
I actually feel kind of like a god. Did you see me make that man repent?
Amazing, Your Grace.
So, what do you think about their testimonies? Something strange is going on, isn't it?
I'm still wondering why you think you should be the one to investigate it, Your Grace.
It's not like I have anything else to do.
Besides be a god.
Overrated. It has nice perks, but the hours are awful.
Lightsong turned to address the final witness, the short priest who stood in his robes of yellow and gold. He was distinctly younger than the other priest.
What is your story?
I was going about my duties, carrying to the record sanctuary several prophecies we have inscribed from the lady's mouth. I heard a distant disturbance in the building. I looked out the window toward the sound, but I saw nothing.
Where were you?
The young man pointed toward a window.
There, Your Grace.
Lightsong frowned. The priest had been on the opposite side of the palace from where the killing had occurred. However, that was the side of the building where the intruder had first entered.
You could see the doorway where the intruder disabled the 2 guards?
Yes, Your Grace, though I didn't see them at first. I almost left the window to search for the source of the noise. However, at that point I did see something odd in the lantern light of the entryway. A figure moving. It was then that I noticed the guards on the ground. I thought they were dead bodies, and I was frightened by the shadowy figure moving between them. I yelled and ran for help. By the time anyone paid attention to me, the figure was gone.
You went down to look for him?
Yes, Your Grace.
And how long did it take you?
Several minutes, Your Grace.
Very well, then. Thank you.
The young priest began to walk over to the main group of his colleagues.
Oh, wait. Did you by any chance get a clean look at the intruder?
Not really, Your Grace. He was in dark clothing, kind of nondescript. It was too far away to see well.
Lightsong waved the man away. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully for a moment, then eyed Larimar.
Well?
Well, what, Your Grace?
What do you think?
I honestly don't know, Your Grace. This is obviously important, however.
It is?
Yes, Your Grace. Because of what that man said, the one who was wounded in the hand, he mentioned a black sword. You predicted it, remember? In the painting this morning?
That wasn't a prediction. That was really there, in the painting.
That's the way the prophecy works, Your Grace, don't you see? You look at a painting and an entire image appears to your eyes. All I see is random strokes of red. The scene you describe, the things you see, are prophetic. You are a god.
But I saw exactly what the painting was said to depict, before you even told me what the title was.
Larimar nodded knowingly, as if that proved his point.
Never mind. Priests. Insufferable fanatics, every one of you. Either way, you agree with me that there is something strange here.
Definitely, Your Grace.
Good. And you'll kindly stop complaining when I investigate it.
Actually, Your Grace, it's even more imperative that you not get involved. You predicted this would occur, but you are an oracle. You must not interact with the subject of your predictions. If you get involved, you could unbalance a great many things.
I like being unbalanced. Besides, this is far too much fun.
As usual, Larimar didn't react to having his advice ignored. They began to walk back toward the main group.
Your Grace, just to sate my own curiosity, what do you think about the murder?
It's obvious. There were 2 intruders. The first is the large man with the sword. He knocked out the guards, attacked their servants, released the lifeless, then disappeared. The second man, the one the young priest saw, came in after the first intruder. That second man is the murderer.
Why do you suppose that?
The first man took care not to kill. He left the guards alive at risk to himself, since they could have regained consciousness at any moment to raise the alarm. He didn't draw his sword against the servants, but simply tried to subdue them. There was no reason for him to kill a bound captive, particularly since he'd already left witnesses. If there were a second man, however, well, that would make sense. The servant who was killed, he was the one who was conscious when the second intruder came through. That servant was the only one who saw the second intruder.
So, you think someone else followed the man with the sword, killed the only witness, and then...
Both of them vanished. I found a trapdoor. I'm thinking there must be passages beneath the palace. It all seems fairly obvious to me. One thing, however, is not obvious.
And what is that, Your Grace?
How in the name of the colors I figured all this out?
I'm trying to grasp that myself, Your Grace.
This comes from before, Scoot. Everything I'm doing, it feels natural. Who was I before I died?
I don't know what you mean, Your Grace.
Oh, come now, Scoot. I've spent most of my returned life just lounging about, but then the moment someone is killed, I leap out of bed and can't resist poking around. Doesn't that sound suspicious to you?
Larimar didn't look at him.
Cullis! I was someone useful? Well, I was just beginning to convince myself that I died in a reasonable way, such as falling off a stump when I was drunk.
You know you died in a brave way, Your Grace.
Could have been a really high stump.
Either way, Your Grace, you know I can't say anything about who you were before.
Well, these instincts came from somewhere.
Lightsong and Larimar walked over to the main group of watching priests and servants. The head priest had returned with a small wooden box.
Thank you. I'm telling you, Scoot, I am not pleased.
You seemed rather happy this morning, Your Grace.
The pair walked away from Mercy Star's palace.
I was happy because I didn't know what was going on. How am I going to be properly indolent if I keep itching to investigate things? Honestly, this murder will completely destroy my hard-won reputation.
My sympathies, Your Grace, that you have been inconvenienced by a semblance of motivation.
Quite right.
Lightsong handed over the box with its furious, lifeless rodent.
Here, you think my awakeners can break its security phrase?
Eventually, though it's an animal, Your Grace, it won't be able to tell us anything directly.
Have them do it anyway. Meanwhile, I need to think about this case some more.
They walked back to his palace. However, the thing that now struck Lightsong was the fact that he'd used the word case in reference to the murder. It was a word he'd never heard used in that particular context, yet he knew that it fit, instinctively, automatically.
I didn't have to learn to speak again when I returned. I didn't have to learn to walk again, or read again, or anything like that. Only my personal memory was lost.
And that left him wondering what else he could do if he tried.
Something happened to those previous God Kings.
Ciri strode through the endless rooms of the God King's palace, her servants scurrying behind.
Something that Bluefingers fears will happen to Susebron. It will be dangerous to both the God King and myself.
She continued to walk, trailing a train made from countless tassels of translucent green silk behind her. The day's gown was nearly gossamer thin. She'd chosen it, then had asked her servants to fetch an opaque slip for her. It was funny how quickly she'd stopped worrying about what was ostentatious and what was not. There were many, much more important problems to worry about.
The priests do fear that something will happen to Susebron. They are so eager for me to produce an heir. They claim it's about the succession, but they went 50 years without bothering. They were willing to wait 20 years to get their bride from Idris. Whatever the danger is, it's not urgent. And yet the priests act like it is.
She needed more information. Unfortunately, the priests were obstructive, the servants silent, and Bluefingers, well, she finally caught sight of him moving through one of the rooms, writing on his ledger. Ciri hurried up. He turned, glimpsing her. His eyes opened wide, and he increased his speed, ducking through the open doorway into another room.
Bluefingers, wait!
Ciri hurried as quickly as the dress would allow, but when she arrived, the room was empty.
Colors, you still think he isn't avoiding me?
Ciri turned to the most senior of her servants.
It would be improper for a servant of the palace to avoid his queen vessel. He must not have seen you.
Right. Just like every other time.
When Ciri sent for him, he always arrived after she'd given up and left. When she had a letter scribed to him, he responded so vaguely that it only frustrated her even further. She depended so much on the priests and scribes for everything, including information.
Except...
There was another source of information.
What activities are going on today in the courtyard?
Many, Vessel. Some artists have come and are doing paintings and sketches. There are some animal handlers showing exotic creatures from the south. I believe they have both elephants and zebras on display. There are also several dye merchants showing off the newest colour combinations. And, of course, there are minstrels.
What about that building we went to before?
The arena, Vessel. I believe there will be games there later in the evening. Contests of physical prowess.
Prepare a box. I want to attend.
Back in her homeland, Ciri had occasionally watched running contests. They were usually spontaneous, as the monks did not approve of men showing off. Still, boys cannot be so easily contained. She had seen them run, had even encouraged them. Those contests, however, had been nothing like what the Halandran men now put on. There were a half-dozen different events going on at once. Some men threw large stones, competing for distance. Others raced in a wide circle around the interior of the arena floor, kicking up sand, sweating heavily in the muggy Halandran heat. Others tossed javelins, shot arrows, or engaged in leaping contests. Ciri watched with a deepening blush, one that ran all the way to the ends of her hair. The men wore only loincloths. During her weeks in the Grand City, she had never seen anything quite so interesting. The beauty of the games kept her distracted for much longer than she'd intended. Her hair permanently locked in a deep maroon blush, even after she got used to the idea of men competing in so little clothing. Eventually, she forced herself to stand and turn away from the performance. She had work to do.
There was a god who came and spoke to me before. Which one was it?
Lightsong the Bold Vessel, god of bravery.
And his colours are?
Gold and red vessel.
Ciri smiled. His canopy showed that he was there. He wasn't the only god to have introduced himself to her during her weeks in the palace, but he was the only one who had spent any amount of time chatting with her. She left her box, beautiful dress trailing on the stones. She'd had to force herself to stop feeling guilty for ruining them, since apparently each dress was burned the day after she wore it. Ciri approached the red and gold pavilion. The god she had seen before lounged inside, relaxing on a couch, sipping a large, beautifully engraved glass cup filled with an icy red liquid. He looked much as he had before. The chiseled, masculine features that she was already coming to associate with godhood, perfectly styled black hair, golden tan skin, and a distinctly blasé attitude. The god, Lightsong, eyed her and nodded in deference.
My queen.
Lightsong the Bold. I trust your day has been pleasant?
So far this day, I have discovered several disturbing and redefining elements of my soul which are slowly restructuring the very nature of my existence. Other than that, it was uneventful. You?
Fewer revelations, more confusion. I'm still inexperienced in the way things work around here. I was hoping you could answer some of my questions. Give me some information, perhaps?
Afraid not.
I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong?
No, nothing wrong, child. The reason I cannot help you is because I, unfortunately, know nothing. I'm useless. Haven't you heard?
I'm afraid I haven't.
Now you should pay better attention. Shame on you.
Actually, I have heard of your reputation, Lightsong the Bold. Useless wasn't the word I heard used, however.
Oh?
No, I was told you were harmless. Though I can see now that's not true. For in speaking to you, my sense of reason has certainly been harmed. Not to mention my head, which is beginning to ache.
Both common symptoms of dealing with me, I'm afraid.
That could be solved. Perhaps it would help if you would refrain from speaking when others are present. I think I should find you quite amiable in those circumstances.
I knew I liked you, girl.
I'm not sure if I should feel complimented or not.
Depends on how seriously you take yourself. Come and recline on one of these couches. Enjoy the evening.
I'm not sure that would be proper.
I'm a god. I define propriety.
I think I'll sit anyway.
Lightsong smiled. He seemed to enjoy making others uncomfortable, but then he also seemed to have no concern for how he himself appeared.
I meant what I said before, Lightsong. I need information.
And I, my dear, was quite honest as well. I am useless. Mostly. However, I'll try my best to answer your questions, assuming, of course, you will provide answers to mine.
And if I don't know the answers to your questions?
Then make something up. I'll never know the difference. Unknowing ignorance is preferable to informed stupidity.
I'll try to remember that.
Do so, and you defeat the point. Now, your questions.
What happened to the previous God Kings?
Died. Oh, don't look so surprised. It happens to people sometimes, even gods. We make, if you haven't noticed, laughable immortals. We keep forgetting about that live forever part and instead find ourselves unexpectedly dead. And for the second time at that. You might say that we're twice as bad at staying alive as regular folk.
How did the God Kings die?
And gave away their breath. Isn't that right, Scoot?
Lightsong's high priest nodded.
It is, Your Grace. His Divine Majesty Susebron IV died to cure the plague of dystrentia that struck Taitlir 50 years ago.
Wait, isn't dystrentia a disease of the bowels?
Indeed.
You mean to tell me that our God King, the most holy and divine personage in our pantheon, died to cure a few tummy aches?
I wouldn't exactly put it that way, Your Grace.
Lightsong leaned over to Ciri.
I am expected to do that someday, you know. Kill myself so that some old lady will be able to stop messing herself in public. No wonder I'm such an embarrassing god. Must have to do with subconscious self-worth issues.
The high priest looked apologetically at Ciri. For the first time, she realized that the overweight priest's disapproval wasn't directed at her, but at his god. To her, he smiled.
The God King's sacrifice was not an empty gesture, Vessel. True, diarrhea may not be a great danger to most, but to the elderly and the young it can be quite deadly. Plus, the epidemic conditions were spreading other diseases, and the city's commerce, and therefore the kingdoms, had slowed to a crawl. People in outlying villages went months without necessary supplies.
I wonder how those who were cured felt, waking to find their God King dead.
One would think they'd be honored, Your Grace.
I think they'd be annoyed. The king came all that way when they were too sick to notice. Anyway, my queen, there you go. That was actually helpful information. You now have me worried that I've broken my promise to you about being useless.
If it's any consolation, you weren't all that helpful yourself. It's your priest who actually seems useful.
Yes, I know. I've tried for years to corrupt him. Never seems to work. I can't even get him to acknowledge the theological paradox it causes when I try to tempt him to do evil.
Ciri paused, and found herself smiling even more broadly.
What?
Talking to you is like swimming in a river. I keep getting pulled along with the current, and I'm never sure when I'll be able to take another breath.
Watch out for the rocks, Vessel. And they look rather insignificant, but are sharp edges under the surface.
It's the crocodiles you have to watch for. They can bite. And what exactly were we talking about anyway?
The God Kings. When the last one died, an heir had already been produced?
Indeed. In fact, he had just been married the year before. The child was born only weeks before he died.
And the God King before him?
Died to heal the children of a village which had been attacked by bandits. The commoners loved the story. The king was so moved by their suffering that he gave himself up for the simple people.
And had he been married the year before?
No, Vessel. It was several years after his marriage, though he did die only a month after his second child was born.
Was the first child a daughter?
Yes, a woman of no divine powers. How did you know?
Colors, both times right after the heir was born.
I'm not truly an expert on these things, I'm afraid, Vessel. And I'm afraid that Lord Lightsong is not either. If you press him, he could very well just start making things up.
Scoot! That's slanderous. Oh, and by the way, your zebra is on fire.
Thank you, both of you. This has actually been rather helpful.
If I might suggest...
Please.
Try a professional storyteller, Vessel. You can order one in from the city, and he can recite both histories and tales of imagination to you. They will provide much better information than we can.
Could you do that for me, Lightsong?
What?
Order in a storyteller. I should like you to be there, in case I have any questions.
I guess I could. Haven't heard a storyteller in some time. Just let me know when.
It wasn't a perfect plan. Her servants were listening, and they might report to the priests. However, if the storyteller came to Lightsong's palace, there was at least some chance of Ciri hearing the truth.
Thank you.
Ciri began to rise.
Not so fast. You promised to answer some of my questions.
Oh, of course.
Now then, did you know any city watchmen back in your home?
City watchmen?
You know, fellas who enforce the law. Police, sheriffs. The men who catch crooks and guard dungeons, that sort.
Well, I knew a couple, I guess. My home city wasn't large, but it was the capital. It did attract people who could be difficult sometimes.
Ah, good. Kindly describe them for me. Not the difficult fellas, the city watch.
I don't know. They tended to be careful. They'd interview newcomers to the village, walk the streets looking for wrongdoing, that sort of thing.
Would you call them inquisitive types?
Yes, I guess. I mean, as much as anybody. Maybe more.
Were there ever any murders in your village?
A couple. There shouldn't have been. My father always says things like that shouldn't happen in Idris. Said murder was a thing of, well, Halandrin.
Yes, we do it all the time. Quite the party trick. Now, did these policemen investigate the murders?
Of course.
Without having to be asked to do so?
Yes.
How'd they go about it?
I don't know. They asked questions, talked to witnesses, looked for clues. I wasn't involved.
No, of course you weren't. Why, if you'd been a murderer, they would have done something terrible to you, yes? Like exile you to another country?
Ciri felt herself pale, hair growing lighter.
Don't go taking me so seriously, Your Majesty. Honestly, I gave up wondering if you were an assassin days ago. Now, if your servants and mine will stay behind for a second, I think I may have something important to tell you.
Lightsong stood up. He began to walk from the pavilion, and his servants remained where they were. Confused, but excited, Ciri rose from her own seat and hurried after him. She caught up with him a short distance away on the stone walkway that ran between the various boxes in the arena. Lightsong looked down at her, smiling.
You are playing a dangerous game, my queen.
Game?
Politics.
I don't want to play politics.
If you don't, it will play you, I'm afraid. I always get sucked in, regardless of what I do. Complaining doesn't stop that, though it does annoy people, which is satisfying in its own right.
So you pulled me aside to give me a warning?
Colors, no. If you haven't already figured out that this is dangerous, then you're far too dense to appreciate a warning. I just wanted to give you some advice. The first is about your persona.
My persona?
Yes, it needs work. Choosing the persona of an innocent newcomer was a good instinct. It suits you. But you need to refine it. Work on it.
It's not a persona. I am confused. I'm new to all this.
Ah, that's the trick to politics, child. Sometimes, although you can't disguise who you are and how you really feel, you can make use of who you are. People distrust that which they can't understand and predict. As long as you feel like an unpredictable element in court, you will appear to be a threat. If you can skillfully and honestly portray yourself as someone they understand, then you'll begin to fit in.
Ciri frowned.
Take me as an example. I'm a useless fool. I always have been, as long as I can remember, which actually isn't all that long. Anyway, I know how people regard me. I enhance it, play with it.
So it's a lie?
Of course not. This is who I am. However, I make certain that people never forget it. You can't control everything, but if you can control how people regard you, then you can find a place in this mess. And once you have that, you can begin to influence factions, should you want to. I rarely do because it's such a bother.
You're a good man, Lightsong. I knew it, even when you were insulting me. You mean no harm. Is that part of your persona?
Of course, but I'm not sure what it is that convinces people to trust me. I'd get rid of it if I could. It only serves to make people expect too much. Just give what I said some practice. The best thing about being locked in this beautiful prison is that you can do some good. You can change things. I've seen others do it, people I respected, even if there haven't been many of those around the court lately.
All right, I will.
You're digging for something. I can sense it. And it has to do with the priests. Don't make too many waves until you're ready to strike. Sudden and surprising. That's how you want to be. You don't want to appear too non-threatening. People are always suspicious of the innocent. The trick is to appear average, just as crafty as everyone else. That way, everyone else will assume that they can beat you with just a little advantage.
Kind of an Adrian philosophy.
You came from us. Or perhaps we came from you. Either way, we're more similar than our outward trappings make us seem. What is that Idrian philosophy of extreme plainness, except a means of contrasting with Halandrin? All those whites you people use. That makes you stand out on a national scale. You act like us, we act like you. We just do the same things in opposite ways.
Ciri nodded slowly.
Oh, and one thing. Please, please, don't depend on me too much. I mean that. I'm not going to be of much help. If your plots come to a head, if things go wrong at the last minute and you're in danger of distress, don't think of me. I will fail you. That I promise from my heart with absolute sincerity.
You're a very strange man.
Product of my society. And since most of the time my society consists pretty much only of myself, I blame God. Good day, my queen.
The meeting is set, my lady. The men are eager. Your work in Taitalier is gaining more and more notoriety.
Vivenna wasn't sure what she thought of that. She sipped her juice. The lukewarm liquid was addictively flavorful, although she wished for some Idrian ice. Tim looked at her eagerly. The short Idrian was, according to Denth's investigations, trustworthy enough. His story of being forced into a life of crime was a tad overstated. He filled a niche in Halandran society. He acted as a liaison between the Idrian workers and the various criminal elements. He was also, apparently, a staunch patriot, despite the fact that he tended to exploit his own people, particularly newcomers to the city.
How many will be at the meeting?
Over 100, my lady. Loyal to our king of promise. And they're influential men, all of them. For Adrians in Taitalier, that is.
How many are there, you suppose? Idrians in the city, I mean.
Perhaps as many as 10,000.
That many?
Trouble on the lower farms. It's hard sometimes, living up in those mountains. Crops fail, and what do you have? The king owns your land, so you can't sell. You need to pay your levies.
Yes, but one can petition in the case of disaster.
Ah, my lady, but most of those men are several weeks' travel from the king. Should they leave their families to make a petition when they fear their loved ones will starve during the weeks it'll take to bring food from the king's storehouse, if they are successful? Or do they travel the much shorter distance down to Taitalier? Take work there, loading on the docks or harvesting flowers in the jungle plantations? It's hard work, no doubt, but steady.
And in doing so, they betray their people.
But who is she to judge? The fifth vision would define it as haughtiness. Here she sat in the cool shade of a canopy, enjoying a nice breeze and expensive juice, while other men slaved to provide for their families. She had no right to sneer at their motivations. Idrian shouldn't have to seek for work in Halandran. She didn't like to admit fault in her father, yet his was not a bureaucratically efficient kingdom. It consisted of dozens of scattered villages with poor highways that were often blocked by snows or rock slides. In addition, he was forced to expend a lot of resources keeping his army strong in case of a Halandran assault. He had a difficult job. Was that a good enough excuse for the poverty of her people who had been forced to flee their homeland? The more she listened and learned, the more she realized that many Idrians had never known anything like the idyllic life she'd lived in her lovely mountain valley.
Meeting is in 3 days hence, my lady. Some of those men are hesitant after Vaher and his failure, but they will listen to you.
I will be there.
Thank you.
Tem rose, bowed, despite the fact that she'd asked him not to draw attention to her, and withdrew. Vivenna sat and sipped her juice. She felt Denth before he arrived.
You know what interests me?
What?
People. People interest me. Particularly people who don't act like they're supposed to. People who surprise me.
I hope you aren't talking about Tim.
I'm talking about you, Princess. Wasn't too long ago that no matter what or who you looked at, you had a look of quiet displeasure in your eyes. You've lost it. You're starting to fit in.
Then that's a problem, Denth. I don't want to fit in. I hate Halandran.
You seem to like that juice, all right.
You're right, of course. I shouldn't be drinking it.
If you say so. Now, if you were to ask the mercenary, which of course nobody ever does, he might mention that it's good for you to start acting like a Halandran. The less you stand out, the less likely people are to connect you to that Idrian princess hiding in the city. Take your friend Parlin.
He looks like a fool in those bright colours.
Vivenna glanced across the street toward where he and Jules were chatting as they watched the escape route.
Does he? Or does he just look like a Halandran? Would you hesitate at all if you were in the jungle and saw him put on the fur of a beast, or perhaps shroud himself in a cloak coloured like fallen leaves?
Vivenna looked again. Parlin lounged against the side of a building, much like street toughs his age she'd seen elsewhere in the city.
You both fit better here than you once did. You're learning.
Vivenna looked down. Some things in her new life were actually starting to feel natural. The raids, for instance, were becoming surprisingly easy. She was also growing used to moving with the crowds and being part of an underground element. 2 months earlier, she would have been indignantly opposed to dealing with a man like Denth, simply because of his profession.
Though you might want to think about switching to trousers.
Vivenna frowned, looking up.
Just a suggestion. You don't like the short Halandran skirts, but the only decent clothing we can buy you that are modest are the foreign make, and that makes them expensive. That means we have to use expensive restaurants lest we stand out. That means you have to deal with all this terrible lavishness. Trousers, however, are modest and cheap.
Trousers are not modest.
Don't show knees.
Doesn't matter.
Just giving my opinion.
I appreciate the advice, Den. Really. I'm confused by a lot of my life lately.
World's a confusing place. That's what makes it fun.
The men we're working with. They lead the Idrians in the city, but exploit them at the same time. Lemek stole from my father, but still worked for the interests of my country. And here I am, wearing an overpriced dress and sipping expensive juice while my sister is being abused by an awful dictator, and while this wonderful, terrible city prepares to launch a war on my homeland.
The motivations of men. They never make sense, and they always make sense.
Right now, you don't make sense.
What I'm trying to say is that you don't understand a man until you understand what makes him do what he does. Every man is a hero in his own story, Princess. Murderers don't believe that they're to blame for what they do. Thieves, they think they deserve the money they take. Dictators, they believe they have the right, for the safety of their people and the good of the nation, to do whatever they wish. I think even Varsha sees himself as a hero. The truth is, most people who do what you call wrong do it for what they call right reasons. Only mercenaries make any sense. We do what we're paid to do. That's it. Perhaps that's why people look down on us so. We're the only ones who don't pretend to hire motives. In a way, we're the most honest men you'll ever meet.
The two of them fell silent. The crowd passing by just a short distance away, a river of flashing colors. Another figure approached the table.
That's right. But you forgot to mention that in addition to being honest, we're also clever. And handsome.
Oh, those go both without saying.
Vivenna turned. Tongfa had been watching from nearby, ready to provide backup. They were letting her start to take the lead in some of the meetings.
Honest, perhaps, but I certainly hope that you're not the most handsome men I'll ever meet. Are we ready to go?
Assuming you're finished with your juice.
Vivenna glanced at her cup. It was very good. Feeling guilty, she drained the juice.
It would be a sin to waste it.
Outside on the street, they were joined by Claude, who'd been given orders to come if she screamed for help. Vivenna turned, looking back at Tongfa and Denth.
Tonks, where's your monkey?
Monkeys are boring anyway.
You lost another one?
Get used to it, Princess. Of all the happy miracles in the universe, one of the greatest is that Tonks has never fathered a child. He'd probably lose it before the week was out.
You may be right. Next appointment. Didenier Garden, right?
Denth nodded.
Let's go.
Vivenna started walking down the street. The others trailed behind, picking up Parlin and Jules on the way. Vivenna didn't wait for Claude to force his way through the crowd. The less she depended on that life list, the better. Moving through the streets really wasn't that difficult. There was an art to it. One moved with a crowd, rather than trying to swim against its flow. It wasn't long before, Vivenna at the front, the group turned off into the wide grassy field that was the Denier Garden. Like the Crossroads Square, this place was an open space of green life set among the buildings and colors. Yet here, no flowers or trees broke the landscape, nor did people bustle about. This was a more reverent place, and it was filled with statues, hundreds of them. They looked much like the other Denier in the city, with their oversized body and heroic poses, many tied with colorful cloths or garments. These were some of the oldest statues she had seen, their stone weathered from years spent enduring the frequent Tetelir rainfalls. This group was the final gift from Peacegiver the Blessed. The statues had been made as a memorial to those who had died in the Many-War, a monument and a warning, so the legend said. The place was far more serene than most in Tetelir, and she could appreciate that. She walked down the steps onto the lawn, wandering between the silent stone figures. Denth moved up beside her.
Remember who we're meeting?
Forgers.
You all right with this?
Denth, during our months together, I've met with thief lords, murderers, and most frighteningly, mercenaries. I think I can deal with a couple of spindly scribes.
These are the men who sell the documents, not the scribes who do the work. You won't meet more dangerous men than forgers. Within the Halandran bureaucracy, they can make anything seem legal by putting the right documents in the right places.
Vivenna nodded slowly.
You remember what to have them make?
Of course I do. This particular plan was my idea, remember?
Just checking.
You're worried that I'll mess things up, aren't you?
You're the leader in this little dance, Princess. I'm just the guy who mops the floor afterward. I hate mopping up blood.
Oh, please.
Vivenna started walking faster and leaving him behind. As he fell back, she could hear him talking to Tongfa.
Oh, bad metaphor.
No, it had blood in it. That makes it a good metaphor.
I think it lacked poetic style.
Find something that rhymes with blood, then. Mud, thud, taste bud.
They sure are literate for a bunch of thugs.
Vivenna didn't have to go far before she spotted the men. They waited beside the agreed meeting place, a large Dedenir with a weathered axe.
You want some work commissioned?
Yes?
It costs.
I can pay.
You're the princess everyone is talking about.
Yes.
Good. Royalty always seems to know how to handle itself. What is it you desire?
Letters. I want them to appear as if they were between certain members of the Halandran priesthood and the King of Idris. They need to have official seals and convincing signatures.
Difficult.
Vivenna pulled something from her dress pocket.
I have a letter written in King Dedalin's hand. It has his seal on the wax, his signature at the bottom.
That makes it possible. Still odd. What do you want these documents to prove?
That these particular priests are corrupt. I have a list on this sheet. I want you to make it look like they've been extorting Idris for years, forcing our king to pay outrageous sums and make extreme promises in order to prevent war. I want you to show that Idris doesn't want war, and that the priests are hypocrites.
Is that everything?
Yes.
It can be done. We'll be in touch. Instructions and explanations are on the back of the paper.
As requested.
The group of men stood, a servant moving forward to back up their lunch. As he did so, they let a napkin blow in the wind, then rushed over and picked it up, grabbing Vivenna's paper too. Soon, all of them were gone.
Well?
Good. You're becoming an expert.
Vivenna smiled, settling back on her blanket to wait. The next appointment consisted of a group of thieves who had stolen, at Vivenna and Denth's request, various goods from the war offices in the Halandran bureaucratic building. The documents were of relatively little import themselves, but their absence would cause confusion and frustration. That appointment wasn't for a few hours, which meant she could enjoy some time relaxing on the lawn, away from the unnatural colors of the city. Denth seemed to sense her inclination, and he sat down, leaning back against the side of the statue's bare pedestal. As Vivenna waited, she saw that Parlin was over talking to Jules again. Denth was right. Though his clothing looked ridiculous to her, that was because she knew him as an Idrian. Looking at him more objectively, she saw that he fit in remarkably well with other young men in the city.
I should send him back to Idris. Parlin. I sent my other guides back. I should have sent him too. He serves no function.
He's quick at adapting to situations, and he's trustworthy. That's good enough reason to keep him.
He's a fool. Has trouble understanding half of what goes on around him.
He's not got the wit of a scholar, true, but he seems to instinctively know how to blend in. And besides, we can't all be geniuses like you.
What does that mean?
It means that you shouldn't let your hair change colours in public, Princess.
Vivenna noticed that her hair had shifted from a still, calm black to the red of frustration.
Lord of Colours, I used to be so good at controlling that. What is happening to me?
Don't worry. Jules has no interest in your friend, I promise you.
Parlin? Why should I care?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe because you and he have been practically engaged since you were children?
That's completely untrue. I've been engaged to the God King since before my birth.
And your father always wished you could marry the son of his best friend instead. At least that's what Parlin says.
That boy talks too much.
Actually, he's usually rather quiet. You have to pry to get him to talk about himself. Either way, Jules has other ties, so stop your worrying.
I'm not worried. And I'm not interested in Parlin.
Oh, of course not.
Vivenna opened her mouth to object, but she noticed Tonk Fa wandering over and didn't want him to join this discussion as well. She snapped her jaw shut.
Flood. Rhymes with blood. Now you can be poetic. It is a nice visual image, far better than taste bud.
Ah, I see. Tongfa?
Yes?
You're an idiot.
Thanks.
Vivenna stood up and began to walk through the statues, studying them, if only to escape having to watch Parlin and Jules. Tonk Fa and Denth trailed along behind at a comfortable distance, keeping a watchful eye. There was a beauty to the statues. They weren't like the other kinds of art in Tetelir. Flashy paintings, colorful buildings, exaggerated clothing. The Daedenir were solid blocks, which had aged with dignity. The Halandrans, of course, did their best to destroy this with the scarves, hats, or other colorful bits they tied on the stone memorials. Fortunately, there were too many in this garden for all to be decorated. They stood as if on guard, somehow more solid than much of the city. Most stared up into the sky or looked straight ahead. Each one was different, each pose distinct. Halandran was such a place of contradictions. Warriors to represent peace, Idrians who exploited and protected each other at the same time, mercenaries who seemed to be among the best men she had ever known, bright colors that created a kind of uniformity, and, over it all, biochromatic breath. It was exploitive, yet people like Jules saw giving up their breath as a privilege. Contradictions. The question was, could Vivenna afford to become another contradiction? A person who bent her beliefs in order to see that they were preserved. The breaths were wonderful. It was more than just the beauty or the ability to hear changes in sound and sense intrinsically the distinct hues of color. It was more even than the ability to sense life around her. It was a connection. The world around her felt close. Even inanimate things like her clothing or fallen twigs felt near to her. They were dead, yet seemed to yearn for life again. She could give it to them. They remembered life, and she could awaken those memories. But what good would it do to save her people if she lost herself? In her opinion, that was why people regarded mercenaries as they did. If you divorced belief from action, then you were on dangerous ground.
Tell me about the mountains. The mountains?
Susebron sat in his chair beside the bed. Ciri lay on one side. Her bulky dress had been too hot for this evening, so she sat in her shift with a sheet over her, resting on one elbow so she could see what he wrote.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the mountains aren't amazing like the wonders you have in Tetelir. You have so many colors, so much variety. I think that rocks sticking from the ground and rising thousands of feet into the air count as a wonder. I guess. I liked it in Idris. I didn't want to know anything else. For someone like you, though, it would probably be boring. More boring than sitting in the same palace every day, not allowed to leave, not allowed to speak, being dressed and pampered. Okay, you win. The mountains are vast. You can't really get a sense of it here in the lowlands. It's by seeing them that you know just how insignificant people really are. I mean, no matter how long we worked and built, we could never pile up anything as high as one of those mountains. They're rocks, like you said, but they're not lifeless. They're green as your jungles. But it's a different green. I heard some of the traveling merchants complain that the mountains cut off their view, but I think you can see more. They let you see the surface of the land as it extends upward toward Austrey's domain in the sky. Oh, I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't talk about other gods in front of you. Other gods. Like those in the court. No, Austrey is the Idrian god. I understand. Is he very handsome? No, you don't understand. He's not a returned like you or Lightsong. He's... well, I don't know. Didn't the priests mention other religions to you? No? I mean, not everybody worships the returned. The Idrians like me worship Austrey, and Pankal people like Bluefingers. Well, I don't actually know what they worship, but it's not you. That is very strange to consider. If your gods are not returned, then what are they? Not they, just one. We call him Austrey. The Halandran used to worship him too before Peacegiver arrived, and they decided to worship the returned instead. But who is this Austrey? He's not a person. He's more of a force. You know, the thing that watches over all people, who punishes those who don't do what is right, and who blesses those who are worthy.
Susebron frowned, looking at her.
Oh, I know it must seem silly to you, but, well, we know he's there. When I see something beautiful in nature, when I look at the mountains with their wildflowers growing in patterns that are somehow more right than a man could have planted, I know. Beauty is real. That's what reminds me of Austrey. Plus, we've got the returned, including the first returned, Vo. He had 5 visions before he died, and they must have come from somewhere. But you don't believe in worshipping the returned. I haven't decided yet. My people teach strongly against it. They're not fond of the way the Halandrans understand religion. So, you do not like those such as me? What? Of course I like you. You're sweet. I don't think god kings are supposed to be sweet. Fine then. You're terrible and mighty, awesome and deific, and sweet. Much better. I should very much like to meet this Austrey. I'll introduce you to some monks sometime. They should be able to help you with that. Now you are mocking me. Oh, more than meeting with this god. However, I should like to see the mountains. You seem to love them very much. I do.
It had been a long time since she'd thought of Idris, but as he mentioned it, she remembered the cool, open feeling of the meadows she had run through not so long ago, the crispness of the chilly air, something that she suspected one could never find in Halandran.
I suspect that the mountains are beautiful, as you have said. However, I believe the most beautiful thing in them has already come down to me. Oh, Susebron, you have the heart of a charmer. Charmer? I must only speak what I see. There is nothing so wonderful as you. Even in my entire court, the mountains must be special indeed to produce such beauty. You see, now you've gone too far. I've seen the goddesses in your court. They're far more beautiful than I am. Beauty is not about how a person looks. My mother taught me this. The travelers in my storybook must not judge the old woman ugly, for she might be a beautiful goddess inside. This isn't a story, Susebron. Yes, it is. All of those stories are just tales told by people who lived lives before ours. What they said about humankind is true. I have watched and seen how people act. It is strange for me to interpret these things, for I do not see as normal men do. I am the God King. Everything, to my eyes, has the same beauty. I don't understand. I have thousands of breaths. It is hard to see as other people do. Only through the stories of my mother can I understand their ways. All colors are beauty in my eyes. When others look at something, a person, one may sometimes seem more beautiful than another. This is not so for me. I only see the color, the rich, wondrous colors that make up all things and give them life. I cannot focus only on the face, as so many do. I see the sparkle of the eyes, the blush of the cheeks, the tones of skin. Even each blemish is a distinct pattern. All people are wonderful. And so, when I speak of beauty, I must speak of things other than these colors. You are different. I do not know how to describe it.
Susebron looked up, and suddenly Ciri was aware of just how close they were to each other. She, only in her shift, with a thin sheet covering her. He, tall and broad, shining with a soul that made the colors of the sheets bend out like light through a prism. He smiled in the firelight.
Oh dear, this is dangerous. Well, yes, very nice. Thank you.
Susebron looked back down.
I wish I could let you go home to see your mountains again. Perhaps I could explain this to the priests. I don't think it would be good to let them know you can read. I could use the artisan's script. It's very difficult to write, but they taught it to me so I could communicate with them if I needed to. Still, telling them you want to send me home could hint that you've been talking to me. Maybe that would be a good thing. Susebron, they're planning to kill you. You have no proof of that. Well, it's suspicious at least. The last two God Kings died within months of producing an heir. You're too untrusting. I keep telling you, my priests are good people.
Ciri regarded him flatly, catching his eyes.
Except for removing my tongue and keeping you locked up and not telling you anything. Look, even if they aren't planning to kill you, they know things they're not telling you. Perhaps it's something to do with biochroma, something that makes you die once your heir arrives. Susebron, how do you pass on your breaths? I don't know. I don't know a lot about it. I don't either. Can they take them from you? Give them to your son? What if that kills you? they wouldn't do that. But maybe it's possible, and maybe that's what happens. That's why having a child is so dangerous. They have to make a new God King, and it kills you to do so. I am a god. I am not given breaths. I am born with them. No, Bluefingers told me you'd been collecting them for centuries, that each God King gets 2 breaths a week instead of 1, building up his reserves. Actually, some weeks you get 3 or 4, but you only need 1 a week to survive. And they can't let that wealth die with you. They're too afraid of it to let you use it, but they also can't let themselves lose it. So when a new child is born, they take the breath from the old king, killing him, and give it to the new one. But returned cannot use their breath for awakening. So my treasure of breaths is useless. Does that mean only the breath you're born with? Or does it include the extra breaths that have been added on top? I do not know. I bet you could use those extra breaths if you wanted. Otherwise, why remove your tongue? You may not be able to access and use that breath that makes you returned in the first place, but you have thousands and thousands of breaths above that.
Susebron sat for a few moments, and then finally he rose, walking across to the window. He stared out at the darkness beyond. Ciri frowned, then picked up his board and crossed the room.
Susebron?
He continued to stare out the window.
Please.
Ciri pushed the board into his hands.
What is it? I am sorry. I do not wish to appear petulant. Is it because I keep challenging your priests? No. You have interesting theories, but I think they are just guesses. You do not know that the priests plan what you claim. That doesn't bother me. Then what is it? You do not believe that the returned are divine. Oh, I thought we'd already talked about this. We did. However, I realized now that this is the reason why you treat me as you do. You are different because you do not believe in my godhood. Is that the only reason I find you interesting? And if you do not believe, it makes me sad, because a god is who I am. It is what I am. And if you do not believe in it, it makes me think you do not understand me. I don't have to believe in you to understand you. They'd say that those people who worship you are the ones who don't understand. They can't get close to you, see who you really are. They're too focused on the aura and the divinity.
Susebron didn't respond.
And I'm not different just because I don't believe in you. There are lots of people in the palace who don't believe. Bluefingers. Some of the serving girls who wear brown, other scribes. They serve you just as reverently as the priests. I'm an irreverent type. I didn't really listen to my father, or the monks back home either. Maybe that's what you need. Someone who would be willing to look beyond your godhood and just get to know you. That is comforting. Though it is very strange to be a god whose wife does not believe in him. Well, I should think it would do every man good to have a wife who isn't as in awe of him as everybody else. Somebody has to keep you humble. Humility is, I believe, somewhat opposite to godhood. Like sweetness?
Susebron put the board down. Then, hesitantly, a little frightened, he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer as they looked out the window at the lights of a city that remained colorful even at night.